Hello, I'm Cosmic and welcome to Bound by Flame, a new action RPG developed by French studio Spiders and published by Focus Home Interactive. Spiders themselves have worked on previous RPGs such as the underrated Of Orcs and Men. Bound by Flame, however, is arguably their biggest solo project to date, and it's an ambitious one at that. I have been looking at the game for some time and I've been very interested to play it since RPGs are my chosen genre in video games. I do tend to hold RPG to really high standards of both gameplay and storytelling, so let's get on and take a look at the game. So Bound by Flame puts you in the role of Vulcan, the powder master or demolition man if you will, of the legendary mercenary company the Freeborn Blades. The game gives you good but limited character creation. There are only a limited number of faces and hairstyles to choose from, but each has great detail in them. Another thing I do love is the ability to create either a male or female version of Vulcan. It's not just a tacked on female version of Vulcan either. Like in other RPGs, you tend to feel like they just put it in there for the sake of being equal or trying to have some kind of contrived way at equality. It's not like that at all in Bound by Flame. In fact, the female version of Vulcan was actually my personal favourite, as she's very well voice acted, has specific romance options, and ultimately was just a complete and utter badass. As you start the game, the world of Atil is on the brink of total collapse. The 7 immortal Ice Lords have waged a war with their army of undead, and there's little resistance left to be had. You, along with the Freeborn Blades, have been contracted by the Red Scribes, a group of want-to-be mages who have retreated to a mountain temple to perform a ritual. Naturally, the Deadwalker army draws near, and eventually you're forced to defend the temple and your employers from the undead legions. Upon being forced back, you enter the chamber where the ritual is taking place, and something goes wrong. Now you absorb kind of an essence which suddenly gives you the power over fire, and gives you the power to fight the impossible. It came with a price, however. You no longer are alone in your own body. A strange demon now lingers within you, and while it is the source of a new power, you're left with an ongoing dilemma. Do you succumb to the demon, allowing you to gain more power, but also allowing it more control over you? Or do you suppress the demon and use your humanity to prevail? The decision is ultimately yours. Bound by Flame isn't an open world RPG like Skyrim. In fact, it's very similar in design to The Witcher 2. The game world is set into hubs. Each hub will have a base camp or a town, and then it has several surrounding areas from that. These aren't small areas, there's plenty to see and explore, and each area is a lot bigger than what Deus Ex Human Revolution had when it used a similar hub-like level design. The world design is very nice. There's a good variety of environments, from humid swamps to the frozen north. The game's graphics are great to look at. It's a very pretty game, and while it does have its graphical flaws with things like armor clipping and such, overall, it's a great visual experience and has nothing that breaks immersion from the game. If you're going to be playing on PC, I highly recommend that you play the game with the controller. The game works well with a mouse and keyboard, but the game is clearly designed for a controller above all else. The gamepad provides the most fun, fluid and enjoyable experience, and it is a much easier experience to use than the keyboard or mouse. One thing I do like about the game, it doesn't restrict sprinting when outside of combat. It does simply hold down the sprint key and get to your destination fast. It's that simple, though do be careful not to miss any chests or loot or run into hordes of enemies. So let's talk about the combat of the game, since you'll be fighting the Deadwalker army a hell of a lot. Similar also to The Witcher 2, you have 2 buttons to attack. One for a quick attack, good for dealing with single enemies, and the other is an area attack, useful for groups. Your version of Vulcan has several ways of dealing with enemies, as well as a choice of weapons and fighting styles. First is the warrior stance, which uses Vulcan's two-handed sword. The warrior stance is all about powerful damaging blows, ripostes, breaking the enemy's guard, and good sweeping area attacks. It's the slowest of all the combat styles, and depending on the weapon, you can vary your attack speed and damage. Second is the ranger stance, which uses Vulcan's dual daggers. The ranger stance is all about stealth, speed and dodging. You can only be in stealth in the ranger stance, and attacking enemies unaware gives a huge damage bonus. The ranger stance is good at dealing damage, and the speed of the attacks can slice and dice your enemies. However, the attacks, while there are more of them and they are faster, they are also weaker, meaning heavily armoured opponents will require you to switch back to warrior to break their guard. Ranger stance is the only stance that allows you to dodge, as parrying with the dual daggers against big ass swords isn't particularly effective. Which actually brings me to something that I really don't like about the combat, which is the fact that I just can't roll or dodge in any stance. It would be really useful and it would stop you getting hit a hell of a lot. But that being said, there is a fair amount of player skill involved in combat, as riposting and parrying requires really good timing. Perfectly timing a parry will invoke a riposte, and often that riposte will critical hit, causing devastating damage, which is especially useful against tougher enemies. The last major part of combat is your spells and abilities. Your demon allows you to wield the power of flame. There are various fire spells available to you, but not only this, as the powder master of the freeborn blades, you have access to traps and a crossbow. This allows you to strategize and prepare for upcoming battles that are going to be particularly tough. All the combat stances and their respective abilities can be upgraded through the path system. Once you gain a level, you'll unlock points to place into 3 paths available to you. The 3 paths are Warrior, Ranger and Pyromancer. The path system gives the means to customize your character to specialize in whichever fighting style you prefer. Like stealth and daggers, go for Ranger. Want a magic based character? Go for Pyromancer. The path has a variety of unlocks that allow you to augment your existing abilities and attacks, as well as improving your character's base stats. On top of the path system are character feats. These feats you can purchase them with feat points to unlock certain upgrades, things like crafting, alchemy, health, etc, and you can also gain feats from certain choices in the game that you will make, which will affect your character's stats. So let's move on to crafting. Now crafting is a major element of the game. Throughout the world you'll find the resources to use to craft. Crafting in Bound by Flame is more like augmenting. Any piece of armour or weapons have crafting slots in which you can craft a good selection of different items that offer different statistical upgrades and bonuses. For example, if you wish to upgrade your two-handed sword, you can craft a selection of hilts and pommels, each with different looks and attributes. You can also recycle your old equipment for materials too. More powerful enhancements will require rarer materials, so do use your rare materials wisely. I really enjoyed customizing my equipment. Armor customizing is particularly fun as it's got the most expansive range of looks and bonuses. It's particularly important to add enhancements that suit your style of play. For example, if you're playing a character who focuses on magic and the Pyromancer path, then armor upgrades that boost your mana and mana regen is a good way to go. Now then, let's talk about what the biggest thing for me in this game is, and that's the story. At the end of the day, this is a story-driven RPG, and I have to say that without giving any spoilers, the main story overall is told very well. The game has several endings depending on your choices that you make in the game, especially the choices you make with your own demonic possession. The story is well paced throughout, and in some places it does get a little disjointed by skipping little bits of information, but it does get back on track well. It took me around 16 hours to complete my first playthrough of the game. Now that is a little short, and there were plenty of things I did miss, especially with the companions. If this was a full $60 game, I would say it's well too short. However, it's a $40 title, and not only that, but there's plenty of replayability, as I discovered during my second playthrough. Choosing different choices not only affects the ending, but also the events along the way too. It actually means that you can play the game twice and get 2 completely different set of events in some places. In all, it means that in theory, you could easily put 30 plus hours into this game, which in my opinion, you certainly get your money's worth there. The main story is strong in the game, and there's some pretty badass moments in there too. The game's voice acting is fantastic, and I really do have to commend the voice actors, as they did a fantastic job on this one. As I've just mentioned, you get companions in the game. Similar to the Dragon Age series, companions have their own stories and goals. You can only take one companion out at a time with you, and each has their own strengths and weaknesses in combat. In terms of storytelling of the companions themselves, I was a little disappointed with this. While there are some fantastic characters like Mathras, the 3,000-year-old immortal being, there are also people like Edwin, who is very Dragon Age Morrigan-esque, which feels very fantasy generic type character that doesn't really bring anything new or anything surprising to the mix. The conversations that you have with your companions also feel silly, as well as the overall narrative. Sometimes they give you information that doesn't really make sense until you realise it does after you do part of the main quest. Essentially, some of the conversation trigger points for the companions are really poor, and they just don't work very well in point of fact. I mean, you get little bits of information, especially in the Edwin character, that it just skips over this massive revelation, and it's just like, oh, didn't you know that? And it's like, where did that even come from? And you'll see what I mean when you get to that point in the game. As you progress in the story, you'll also come across moral choices, especially when it comes to your demon counterpart. Now, whether you decide to give in to the demon or whether you decide to stay with your humanity will affect what happens in the game. Not only will it affect what happens in the game, it will affect the character itself. So for example, if you give in to the demon, you will become more demonesque in your appearance, you will gain statistical upgrades and debuffs that reflect being a demon of flame, and it becomes a very interesting story, and people will react differently to you depending on what you do. So if you become more like a demon, then people are going to be more frightened of you. Not only this, that some of the companions who don't think the demon is a good idea will become more aggressive towards you, and it completely changes some of the companion choices in terms of conversations that you can have, and it does add a real sense of replayability to the game, which I always like. The last thing I want to mention is the game's musical score. Boy, it is a good one. It is absolutely phenomenal. It is one of the best musical scores I've heard in a video game in a very long time. In fact, I do hope that Spiders or Focus Home Interactive bring out the soundtrack separate, because I definitely would like to add that to my collection. It is truly epic, and it is one of the best musical scores, especially with the tie-in of the main story and the events that take place. It just brings the visual and the audio experience together perfectly, and I have to commend the composer on it, because I have to say it's very rare that I sit there and just enjoy the music of a video game by itself, but in Bound by Flame I have to say that I did, and it was just truly worth listening to over and over again. In conclusion, I think Bound by Flame is a fantastic game. I think it's a really good story driven experience. I think that the characters, the voice acting, everything like that is fantastic. I think that Spiders have to be commended on taking on a project as large as this, as they've never done a large project like this before, and they pulled it off for the most part. Yes, the game does have its faults and its failings, and there's some things that are frustrating in there. There's some things that just you feel a bit, oh, I'm not sure that quite works there. But at the end of the day, overall, for a $40 game, you get one hell of an experience, and it's a great cinematic experience. The biggest thing is not to compare this game to something like Skyrim. It's a completely different type of game. The thing is, most people will start comparing this to The Witcher 2, which is a fair comparison, and maybe Dragon Age 2, which is an unfair comparison. If you're going to compare it to Dragon Age 2, Bound by Flame is leaps and bounds better than Dragon Age 2 in possibly every aspect, in my opinion. Yes, it's not perfect, but Dragon Age has some serious mechanical flaws that I just could not forgive. And Bound by Flame, for the most part, all its flaws, all its errors are minor for the most part, and I think that if you go out and buy the game now, you will certainly get your money's worth if you enjoy story-driven RPGs. And that's Bound by Flame. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe and leave a comment. Do share it if you did enjoy the review, and thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.
All the fall to ruin about you, yet you still bewail your loose bowels and vomitings.